And we are back here as we preview the Richmond Spiders game versus the Howard Bison. Howard comes into town. We'll talk about that. But before we talk about the Spiders game versus the Howard Bison on Saturday, we got to kind of look back. So let's talk about the Spiders' 38-14 win over VMI. Wow. Very interesting. A 3 hour, 19-minute weather delay in this game. But the Spiders offense came to play. They had 6 plays of 25 yards or more. Very explosive. The run game came alive. Jamal Brown had 153 yards. Andrew King chipped in with 83 yards. And then Aziz Foster Power had a touchdown for the Spiders. So that run game was very effective. For the Spiders defensively, they held VMI to only 2 first downs in the second half. They had 2 sacks, 5 quarterback hurries, and 6 tackles. Very solid performance for the Richmond Spiders and their 38-14 win over VMI. So one of the key things that I noticed in Coach Russ Huesman's media availability on Wednesday about the opponent of Howard. He also talked about some other things that were really interesting. May not be necessarily geared towards his game against Howard, but there was some talk about as far as now like the ACC potentially, the ACC going to have like 9 conference games. Could there be a situation where Richmond might be eliminated? Because I know next year they play NC State, so it could be a situation where Richmond might be eliminated from NC State schedule, which is that was really interesting part of the press conference in my personal opinion. But that'll probably be a story that we'll probably be talking about in the year 2026 as everything kind of dust settles with that. But sticking with the game plan in itself and with Howard on the Howard end, he did credit Howard as being essentially an athletic experience. Their experience up front as well. And they also mentioned that they had like 15 graduate students. So this is another team that comes in with some wealth of experience and kind of almost not in the mold of Richmond, but eerily similar in certain spots. But definitely they do possess some more experience than maybe what the Spiders have currently on their constructed roster. So let's talk about this matchup with Richmond versus Howard. So this is the third all-time meeting where Richmond has swept the series thus far. In 2017, they scored 68 points. And then in 2021, they scored 38 in those matchups. And Howard is coming off of a 34-7 win over the other HU, which I guess in this standpoint that Howard is the real HU by beating Hampton by that margin. So players to watch in this matchup. Obviously, when you look at for the University of Richmond side, you definitely got to talk about the running back trio of we talked about Brown, King, and also Foster Powell. I think they'll be great in this game. I think definitely how I look at the weather forecast. I'm not a meteorologist in a sense, but there will be this game probably will be almost eerily similar to the VMI game where there's going to be some rain. I definitely think there's a possibility, an extreme possibility of another weather delay, which this Richmond team, they're built for it. I mean, obviously against Warford a few weeks ago, and then also fast forward to last week's versus VMI. So I definitely think the ground game is definitely going to be great for the Spiders and for quote unquote an advantage. So also Cal Wickersham, also yet again always effective. He's one thing. It's like depth taxes. And he's going to give you about a 70-75% completion percentage. So he's very efficient. So you'll definitely see another Cal Wickersham performance, and also coupled with that run game in which you can definitely probably see him kind of take it out the pocket and kind of and do his thing running wise. So you kind of add that element too. So I definitely think that's going to be something that Howard's potentially going to have a problem with, in my personal opinion. And then defensively, you look at obviously the mainstay with Carter Glassmeyer. Last week had 6 tackles. And then also a guy, and that's one thing I like about this secondary for the Richmond Spiders. Guys just step up week in and week out. I think if you listen to my previews throughout the whole year, we've always had a guy. As far as I know, we talked about D'Angelo Stalker a few weeks ago as keys, but now we got to insert Lee Bruner the fourth. He had his first interception last week against VMI, and he's somewhat has some Howard ties. Both his parents did go to Howard University, so it's really gonna be interesting. Now and obviously Bruner is from the Washington, D.C. area, so he does have some ties, and I think it'll be an interesting storyline going into this game for that. So those are kind of my players to watch for the Spiders. For Howard, a very interesting wild card in Caden Cobb. He's the wide receiver. He actually had a touchdown pass last week against Hampton. So that's something to kind of watch for, where you kind of could potentially see maybe some trick plays from there and kind of keep Richmond kind of off kilt in a sense. So definitely look for that potentially, that dynamic. And also Travis Kearney, the running back. He had 113 yards last week with 2 touchdowns. And their linebacker core, obviously led by Jaquavian Smith. Last week he had 2 sacks in a win over Hampton. So what are my 3 keys for a Richmond Spider victory? It's simple. You want to have an early start, almost similar to like the VMI. If you get an early start, especially for a team like Howard that's on the road, get them rattled. I think that's one of the keys there, to start off early. And I think one of the keys to have an early start is that run game and kind of establish that ground game with them. So that's going to be key in my personal opinion. And also I think Cal Wickersham, yet again, I think if he's like I said earlier, Dev Taxes and Cal Wickersham, 72% completion percentage, game in, game out. I think that's going to be a key. And then also we talked about the run game. If he becomes a part of the run game as well too, I think that's going to be interesting. And then the Spiders team is always opportunistic defensive wise, as far as when it comes from the turnovers, like I talked about earlier, as far as different guys who have stepped up and have had different have stepped up and had turnovers in these games this year. So I definitely think if they win the turnover battle, that's going to be also another key for a Richmond Spider victory. So this wraps up our recap of the Spiders' 38-14 win over VMI. My brief thoughts on Coach Russ Huesman's weekly availability, and also as we previewed Richmond versus Howard on Saturday, a 2 p.m. kickoff. So, and we'll be at Robin Stadium on Saturday. So check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Couch Coach Live, where we'll be giving you updates throughout the game. And this wraps up this week's preview, and we'll catch you guys next week as we dive back into some Patriot League football. And we're out.